Okay, let's talk about the serve. I've got a few models here of pro players and some college players. And the main reason I want to make this video is despite all the great online teachers and thousands of videos online, I have not found a single video that really captures the key elements that I like to emphasize helping juniors and adults with their serve. And there's a few things, a few checkpoints that I think are important. I think there's a lot of misinformation out there as well. So I want to talk a little bit about pinpoint and platform, but not in the context that you normally hear. You normally hear that the pinpoint stance is great for leg drive because it's much easier to jump when your feet are together, but I don't think that's really the reason for the pinpoint stance. And I'm pretty much agnostic. I think you can create a really good serve from either footwork pattern, from a platform stance or from a pinpoint stance. But for those that don't know, the pinpoint stance is when you drag your back foot up right before contact or during the coordination of the serve. So my model here is Kyrgios, and the one thing that I wanted to point out with this video is more or less why that works well for him and many others. And I think for juniors, this is really a good model because one of the main reasons for this is the hip motion and moving the hip forward, which gets the weight going, which improves the whole coordination of the serve. And I think that's really the key element of the pinpoint, and not the fact that you're able to jump better, which is certainly true and a byproduct of this, but I'll show you what I'm talking about. So one of the first elements that you will typically find is this rocking motion, and then the left toe up. And the reason for this is, again, if we start moving this forward, you're going to see his hip moving forward into the court. Well, if you rock this motion back, then it's a little more coordinated for it to move forward, and that's what Kyrgios is doing here. Is he's pushing his weight back on his back foot, and now you can see his hip really initiated the serve. So let's back that up. So he's rocking, his right foot is up, now his left toe is up. That means his weight has moved to his back foot. But what puts his weight on his front foot is his hip. Now I'm going to just frame through this so you can see what is really moving here. And his hips are moving. His hips are pulling his weight forward, and that just makes sense that his right foot would come along for the ride. So he's not stepping up. He's just dragging his foot because his hip is pulling it forward. And this is the most basic concept that everyone misses. They believe that you're stepping up with this right foot, and that's not really the case. It's the hip that is pulling that back foot forward, and as you can see, it gets pretty much over the baseline. So from this angle, we want to see the three things. Would be the motion going from the front foot to the back foot and back to the front foot with the hip action. We want to see the hip over the baseline, and then we want to see the toss in front. So if you happen to be videotaping your serve, those are the checkpoints. Is that you want to see this rocking motion, the front foot up, weight to the back, hip driving forward first, then you pull this foot forward, make sure your toss is in front, and then drive up to contact from there. Now from this angle, we want to have a couple other different checkpoints. And the first is the location of the toss should be over the right hitting shoulder. No further to the right than this hitting shoulder. So somewhere between your right ear and at most the outside of this hitting shoulder. So that's checkpoint on this angle, and then the other checkpoint that I want to look for is this angle between your arm, your hand, and the racket. So at this point, right before contact, and this is a very common mistake that I see, is that the racket is actually straight up and down in line with the arm. And this does not allow the pronation to accelerate the racket into contact. So that's the other checkpoint that you want to see from this angle. And as he goes through contact, you can see that his strings will be facing a little bit more towards the right side fence, where most rec players you would see their strings facing the left side fence or down. So this is just another angle to see that rocking motion, left toe up, forward, and you see how far he tosses into the court. But watch, everything is being driven by the hips. Now, I want to use the Djokovic model. Well, actually, this angle I thought was very interesting. Djokovic has a platform stance, but he also raises his left toe during his serving mechanics. And you can see very much, same situation, he is using his hips to pull his weight forward, and you can tell that he is coming off the ground or driving up predominantly with his front foot. And some would argue that this should be more balanced, but I think the reality is that if you're driving your hip forward, more of the weight's going to be on the left foot. Now this angle is really to talk more about the chest up, and there's many different reasons. I'm not going to go into those here, but again, this is just another checkpoint that want to be sure that the chest is pointing up. This allows you to rotate the elbow on the proper plane and also pronate. And I just had a couple videos of a few college players here getting into these similar checkpoints that you're going to see from the pro players. So if you saw, it was very subtle, left toe up, weight back, weight forward, chest up, and then you can see he's on the probably the furthest right that I would want to see this toss, just on the outside of that hitting shoulder. And then the last video I wanted to show, everyone talks about grips, and I think that there's a little bit of wiggle room in grips. We don't always want to say you have to have a continental grip or you have to have an Eastern backhand grip for the second serve. So this is Petros from Wake, and in my opinion, his grip is a little more towards an Eastern forehand grip. The main thing is his knuckles are aligned on that pallet, so I don't think his index knuckle is really on bevel 2. I think it's just a little bit between bevel 2 and bevel 3, but the important thing is that they're aligned on the grip pallet. So those are the main checkpoints that I wanted to go through, and hopefully this was helpful to talk about the serve and maybe clarify some things that you've heard elsewhere and on videos online.